turn to Senator Daines for 5 minutes.
Thank you much. Professor Barr, you've previously voiced concerns regarding the regulatory relief put in place following the enactment of Dodd-Frank. Specifically, you were a very vocal critic of Senate Bill 2155. That was the 2018 Dodd-Frank rollback that thankfully passed the Senate with an overwhelming support, had a strong bipartisan support by 2-1, more than 2-1 margin. You stated at the time that passing the bill would be, quote, a significant mistake. You mentioned earlier in this hearing that many of your concerns were addressed by a manager's amendment. My question is, do you still think that passing that bill was a mistake?
Thank you, Senator Daines. As you mentioned, a number of my concerns were addressed by the passage of a manager's amendment, as well as subsequent regulation, for example, that made it clear that the custody bank provision could only genuinely be used by custody banks, which was an area of concern. But looking back,
do you still think passing that bill was a mistake?
I think, on balance, again, I would have chose a different balance. I don't think that, I think reasonable people can disagree about that. It obviously garnered widespread support in the Congress, and I would be, quite committed to implementing the law as written by the Congress in doing that. And when you look at overall capital and liquidity level in the system today, as I have said previously, it's quite strong.
Now, what are your views on the regulatory tailoring provisions that were included in that bill, 2155? And how would you approach these provisions in terms of implementation without the Fed?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. As I indicated earlier in response to Senator Rounds, I think a tiered approach, a tailored approach to regulation makes a lot of sense. I think the strictest rules ought to be applying to the largest institutions, and there should be graduated approach below that, and especially care ought to be taken with respect to community banks who have difficulty meeting the regulatory burden. So I'm a strong supporter of the principle of tiered regulation.
I want to turn to CFPB for a moment. With regard to the CFPB, you've stated, and I quote, attacks on its structure, budget, director, and authorities are pretext for weakening consumer protections in general. You've also stated that Republican opposition to the CFPB during the Dodd-Frank debate was, and I quote you, all about not wanting consumer regulation. Do you stand by those very partisan views?
Senator Daines, when I hear those, I think they're exactly the kinds of things I tell my students not to do. I think they were intemperate remarks, and I don't think that is a good way to engage in productive dialogue with people you disagree with, so I regret them.
Thanks. In light of the Supreme Court's decision that the CFPB's original governance structure, which you helped to design, was unconstitutional, do you acknowledge that Republican concerns may have had some merit?
Thank you, Senator. My concern about the constitutionality was not about whether the particular choice was a good choice or a bad choice. It was about who gets to decide, and my strong view is Congress gets to decide. So you get to decide if you want to structure a federal agency with a commission or a board or a single director. I think Congress ought to be given a great deal of deference in that by the judicial branch. And in history, Congress has used a wide variety of techniques to establish agencies. I think that's the right approach.
Switch to the issue of climate change. Do you believe that climate change is among the top 3 threats to financial stability? Because we've heard that from witnesses here at this committee in the past. What are your views there? Is it one of the top 3 threats?
I think climate change is an interesting example because it's a very long-term issue, but we need to figure out how to wrap our arms around it today.
But would it rise as you assess priorities and thinking through the lens of which you will, if confirmed, govern? Do you believe it's one of the top 3 threats to financial stability?
Senator, I've not thought about a priority ranking of the threats facing the financial sector. I think the job of the vice chair, if confirmed, is to think about the range of emergent threats to the financial system, and then to design a regulatory approach and to work with financial institutions so you can have a consistent risk management framework. You know, if you think back before the global pandemic was not on anybody's list of the next threat to the financial sector. So I think it's just important to be humble about our understanding of those sets of risks.
All right, thank you.